Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, President-elect Trump floats making Canada, Greenland, and the Panama Canal all part of the U.S. Why he says it's necessary and how he might do it. Iris Tao has the details on that and the latest in Trump's legal cases. Former President Jimmy Carter is lying in state at the U.S. Capitol, where the public can pay respects until the funeral service on Thursday. Vice President Kamala Harris and congressional leaders delivering the first eulogies tonight. Luis Martinez on Capitol Hill. President Biden says he spoke with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau after his resignation announcement. The president calls Canada a close ally and Trudeau a friend. Jason Blair reports. A potentially destructive and life-threatening windstorm is developing across Southern California, significantly increasing the wildfire risk in the days ahead. Christina Conorona reports from the Golden State. And Facebook getting rid of fact-checkers. CEO Mark Zuckerberg signals a cultural shift, prioritizing free speech while hindering censorship.
This is NTD Evening News. Live from our global headquarters in New York City, here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. President-elect Trump offering new details on his desire to make Canada, Greenland, and the Panama Canal part of the U.S. He's also criticizing the legal cases against him, which could continue beyond his inauguration. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
In a wide-ranging press conference on Tuesday, President-elect Trump talks about the transition process, his upcoming foreign policy, and the country's economic outlook. He complains that the transition process is being interfered with by what he calls lawfare.
They're playing with the courts, as you know. They've been playing with the courts for 4 years.
In the New York business records case, an appeals court on Tuesday denied Trump's request to delay his sentencing set for this Friday. Trump also criticizes a pending report by special counsel Jack Smith on his investigations. But Judge Eileen Cannon on Tuesday temporarily blocked the release of that report, to which Trump called great news.
And it'll be a fake report, just like the investigation was a fake investigation, because it was a fake case against a political opponent. They thought they were going to use this to beat me.
And on foreign policy, Trump hints at using military force and economic pressure to acquire Greenland and the Panama Canal. That, he says, is to boost U.S. national security and to protect them from Chinese threats.
The Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China. China.
Trump also says he might use economic force to make Canada part of the U.S., saying the U.S. has been paying too much for Canada's safety. But Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who will resign soon, responded, saying there isn't a snowball's chance in hell for that to happen. On domestic policies, Trump vows to expand drilling and reverse President Biden's recent ban on offshore drilling in parts of Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Trump also touts a new $20 billion investment from a Dubai billionaire to build data centers across the U.S., saying it shows a bright economic outlook at home.
For the last 4 years, we've been waiting for this moment.
Notably, Trump doubles down on his vow to make major pardons for January 6 defendants, and also noting that they will need to first find out who exactly was involved. Reporting from West Palm Beach, Iris Tao, NTD News.
President Biden responds to Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's resignation with a public statement. The president also announces another round of federal land protection measures. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has the update.
Following a resignation announcement by Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, President Joe Biden says that the U.S. has no better ally than Canada. Biden says over the last decade, Prime Minister Trudeau has led with commitment, optimism, and strategic vision. The U.S.-Canada alliance is stronger because of him, the American and Canadian people are safer because of him, and the world is better off because of him. Trudeau said on Monday he will step down as Prime Minister once his party, the Liberal Party of Canada, has chosen a new leader. And a day after announcing a large area of offshore drilling bans, President Biden establishes hundreds of thousands of acres of land conservation in California. Biden announces that he will sign a proclamation to make the Chuckwalla and Satitla Highlands into national monuments. This will protect and preserve 848,000 acres of federal land. The White House says that President Biden has now conserved more lands and waters than any president in history, with a total of 674 million acres protected during his presidency. A statement says, since taking office, President Biden has swiftly advanced the most ambitious conservation agenda in U.S. history, setting and pursuing a bold goal to conserve at least 30% of U.S. lands and waters by 2030. The Satitla Highlands National Monument is in Northern California and includes homelands of the Pit River Tribe and Modoc people. It also includes a dormant volcano and has the longest known lava tube system in the world. The Chuckwalla National Monument is in Southern California and includes sacred sites of 5 groups of indigenous people and 50 rare species of plants and animals. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
The House of Representatives passed the Laken-Riley Act today. It was the first bill to get a vote by the new Congress. The bill is named after a Georgia college student who was killed by an illegal immigrant who was previously arrested for theft. It would require illegal immigrants who commit certain nonviolent crimes like theft or burglary to be detained. The Senate will likely take up the bill for the first time on Friday. But several Democrats would have to vote for the measure to clear the 60-vote threshold required to advance legislation. Former President Jimmy Carter will lie in state at the U.S. Capitol for 3 days starting today. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has the details.
The casket carrying the last remains of former President Jimmy Carter traveled from Georgia to Joint Base Andrews in Maryland this Tuesday for the 3-day national ceremonies before his funeral in Washington, D.C. The first ceremony in the nation's capital was at the U.S. Navy Memorial, where his casket was transferred from a motorcade to a horse-drawn Cassian for a procession from the U.S. Navy Memorial to the Capitol Rotunda, where former President Jimmy Carter will be lying in state for the next 3 days. Former President Jimmy Carter's family walked alongside the horse-drawn Cassian from the U.S. Navy Memorial to the Capitol Rotunda, where the former president's casket will be guarded by members of each branch of the U.S. military. Lawmakers held a service in honor of the former president in the Capitol Rotunda, and congressional leaders from both parties delivered eulogies, as well as Vice President Kamala Harris.
Today we gather to celebrate the life of a man whose works will echo for generations to come.
We meet in this sacred hall of self-government to honor an extraordinary man, a man who modeled the virtues of service and citizenship, as well as any other American. Surrounding us are the statues of those who gave their time, their energy, and their lives for the good of America. Before us lays a man who now joins their midst.
He was a little embarrassed by my question, President Carter recalled, but then he finally said, I try to have 2 loves in my heart. One love is for God, and the other love I have in my heart is for the person who happens to be in front of me at any particular time.
After 8 p.m. on Tuesday night, the Capitol Rotunda will be open to the public for those wishing to pay their last respects to former President Jimmy Carter until Thursday morning, while he will be transferred to the Washington National Cathedral for his last funeral service, where President Joe Biden is expected to deliver the eulogy. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Millions across Southern California are under a red flag warning as a powerful windstorm now underway threatens widespread damage and an extreme wildfire risk. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
A potentially destructive windstorm is taking shape across Southern California, prompting a red flag warning for 19 million people, including those in the Los Angeles metro area. The National Weather Service warns of critical fire danger in Los Angeles and Ventura counties, with the storm expected to peak early Wednesday. Wind gusts could reach 80 miles per hour, with isolated gusts up to 100 miles per hour in the mountains and foothills. The National Weather Service has issued red flag warnings for parts of the region, including the Malibu coast, the Santa Monica Mountains, San Gabriel Valley, and several other high-risk areas. These warnings will remain in effect until 6 p.m. Thursday. CAL FIRE is increasing staffing and resources by deploying 45 additional fire engines and 6 hand crews from Northern California. Local units are working around the clock with extra engines, bulldozers, and water tenders stationed in Los Angeles, Riverside, San Bernardino, and other counties. The fire risk is critical through Friday, with winds exceeding 60 miles per hour and gusts as high as 100 miles per hour in some areas. The Los Angeles Fire Department is already battling a vegetation fire in Pacific Palisades, which has spread to over 200 acres. By Tuesday afternoon, the LAFD issued mandatory evacuation orders for around 30,000 people, affecting a broad area that officials anticipate will expand and shift rapidly. Strong winds could bring down trees and power lines, causing outages. The LA Department of Water and Power advises customers to keep flashlights, charged phones, and portable chargers ready. Reporting from the city of El Monte, Christina Corona, NTD News.
We're learning more about the Tesla Cybertruck that exploded in front of the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas last week. Authorities say they found what they are calling a manifesto that the driver left behind on his phone.
There's a variance of grievances and a constant evolution of his plans or intents of what he wanted to do. There's mentions of political and social and cultural issues to include criticism of the current administration. He also does write in there that he was super high on weed and drinking, which we are still working to confirm. And then he discusses the Cybertruck being used as a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device. He also says that he has graphic encounters from his military experience that replay in his head over and over, and that now he feels like he's a shell of a human being with nothing to live for. So a few other excerpts for now is he discusses the concerns about the withdrawal from Afghanistan and losing his teammates, which again builds upon that potential PTSD that we're referring to. He does transition at some point and talks about being concerned of the media labeling him as a terrorist and that he had no intent on killing anyone else aside from himself. But finally, one of the last points in there, because this is constant flow back and forth of different thoughts, he does talk about his intent to make this as public as possible and that he is loaded up on boom and quotations and fireworks for New Year's.
Police say Matthew Levelsberger, the Army Green Beret who fatally shot himself before the truck exploded, used ChatGPT to plan this event. A review of his searches through ChatGPT shows that he was looking for information on explosive targets, the speed at which certain rounds of ammunition would travel, and how many fireworks to buy. Police say it's concerning because it appears to be the first such use of the AI tool on U.S. soil. Investigators say Levelsberger initially planned to launch the blast from the glass skywalk at the Grand Canyon and appeared to change his mind one day before the explosion. It's still unclear why he chose the Trump Hotel. Investigators also note that the explosives were ignited, not detonated, and that the explosion could potentially have been bigger. The first American to contract a severe case of the bird flu has died. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on the case and government recommendations to stay safe.
The Louisiana Department of Health confirmed the death on Monday. Authorities say the patient was over 65 years old and reportedly had underlying medical conditions. The individual was hospitalized with the flu after an exposure to a flock of birds.
We do have this happening all the time. We do have migratory birds moving from different parts of the country. We sometimes have them infected with bird flu viruses, and they can spread to local birds or to backyard flocks.
The state recommends that people be careful around sick and dead animals, their droppings, and any contact with them.
And not eating undercooked poultry or eggs or milk, consuming milk that hasn't been pasteurized.
No other person linked to the deceased patient has become ill. Officials say the patient had a strain of bird flu that is currently circulating in wild birds and poultry. The strain is different from a variant that has appeared in dairy cattle. Just last week, the National Institutes of Health called for more action to tackle bird flu. So far, several dozen Americans have contracted the virus. Health officials have stressed that bird flu is still mainly an animal health issue and that the risk to the public remains low. No spread of the virus from person to person has been documented in the United States or elsewhere. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Facebook getting rid of fact-checkers. CEO Mark Zuckerberg signals a cultural shift, prioritizing free speech and hampering censorship. Here's the story.
We're going to get rid of fact-checkers.
Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg signaling a cultural shift at Facebook and Instagram, saying it's time to get back to their roots around free expression.
Fact-checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created. The recent elections also feel like a cultural tipping point towards once again prioritizing speech.
Zuckerberg says he wants to work with incoming President Donald Trump to fight censorship and replace fact-checkers with community notes, like the ones on X.
Do I think they'd be doing this if the Biden administration had won a second round? No.
Media expert Shema Hyder says Zuckerberg knows the platforms have to change because of the incoming administration. Also, she says it's because the fact-checking has been very bad.
So this is not a good product. And in fact, you can see that because if you look across the board, and what people often saw in their feeds did not line up with reality.
Meta is also moving content moderation teams from California to Texas to reduce the appearance of bias. And they will bring back political content.
It's absolutely a no-brainer if Facebook, Meta, whatever you want to call it, wants to continue to be relevant in this free speech platform. I think we've seen things change.
Media professional Greg Linnelli says the trends are changing, particularly with both Musk and Trump coming in.
Coming up, over 100 people are reported dead in Tibet after a powerful earthquake strikes the area. Why Tibet's government in exile blames the Chinese Communist Party for the quake. Israeli forces are keeping the pressure on Hamas terrorists to help free the hostages, plus what President-elect Trump says is going to happen if the hostages aren't released before he gets into office. Jason Perry reports. South Korean authorities today renewing an arrest warrant for its embattled president over his imposition of martial law. This comes as the leader has defied attempts to detain him. Sam Wong has the latest. And Britain has committed to implementing measures to tackle the nation's grooming gang scandal following an ongoing row between Tesla's Elon Musk and Britain's Keir Starmer. Malcolm Hudson brings us more from London after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Over 100 people are reported dead in Tibet after a powerful earthquake struck the area. Tibet's government in exile blames the Chinese Communist Party for the many deaths. Here's what they're saying.
A strong earthquake struck the foothills of the Himalayas near one of Tibet's holiest cities on Tuesday. The quake killed at least 126 people and destroyed hundreds of houses, according to Chinese authorities. The magnitude 6.8 earthquake's epicenter was about 50 miles north of Mount Everest, the world's highest mountain. Tremors also shook buildings in neighboring Nepal, Bhutan, and India.
Hold China accountable for such an event that takes place.
A member of Tibet's parliament in exile says China is to blame for Tuesday's earthquake and the deaths that came with it.
One of the most important causes is the mining, excessive amount of natural resources mining that is taking place under the Chinese Communist Party.
She says China digs into Tibet's mountains to mine them without taking the necessary steps to preserve those mountains. The members of Tibet's parliament in exile are currently living in neighboring India. This comes after the Chinese Communist Party invaded Tibet in the 1950s.
Since the occupation of Tibet, China has been exploiting the natural resources, you will have more and more disaster that are all made by man, the Chinese wrong policy.
Rescue work is now underway. People are clearing through the rubble to see if they can find any survivors. The official number of casualties could become higher if more dead bodies are found.
Israeli forces are keeping the pressure on Hamas terrorists to try to help free the hostages. And President-elect Trump said if the hostages aren't released before he gets into office, it won't be good for Hamas. NTD's Jason Perry has the details.
Israeli forces recently released this video of Islamic Jihad terrorists covered in blankets moving through the rain towards Israeli troops in the Gaza Strip. Israel said they killed one of the terrorists who was an Islamic Jihad commander and had also participated in the October 7th attacks. The other one put his hands in the air and surrendered to Israeli troops and will likely be interrogated. And speaking of interrogations, Israeli forces recently interrogated a Hamas terrorist who was detained at the Kamal Adwan hospital. In the video released on Tuesday, he said Hamas uses the hospital because they believe it's safe as the military cannot directly target it.
They leave the hospital late at night. They arrive at the hospital in the morning. Inside the hospital, they distribute the grenades and mortar equipment for attacking tanks, for ambush positions, and for tunnels underground.
Israel's chief of the general staff told troops that they will continue to keep the pressure on Hamas terrorists.
We will bring them to the point where they understand that they must return all the hostages. Otherwise, the highly professional work you are doing will continue and continue, taking more prisoners and killing more operatives.
President-elect Trump on Tuesday shared his thoughts on the hostage situation.
If those hostages aren't back, I don't want to hurt your negotiation. If they're not back by the time I get into office, all hell will break out in the Middle East. And it will not be good for Hamas, and it will not be good, frankly, for anyone.
And residents in the Gaza Strip are hoping for a ceasefire as well and an end to the fighting.
We hope from God there will be a deal. We hear there's a truce and a ceasefire, but what's happening under the table and behind the scenes, this is what we don't understand and don't know yet.
Meanwhile, U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein gave an update on the current 60-day ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon, which has only about 20 days left. He said Israel had withdrawn its forces from parts of southwestern Lebanon and added this.
These withdrawals will continue until all Israeli forces are out of Lebanon completely. And as the Lebanese army continues to deploy into the south and all the way to the Blue Line.
And after Israeli forces left the area, Lebanese forces moved in. Israel and Hezbollah have agreed to pull their forces out of southern Lebanon before the end of January, and that area will then be secured by the Lebanese army and UN peacekeepers. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Turning our attention now to South Korea, authorities today renewing an arrest warrant for President Yoon Suk-yeol over his imposition of martial law. This comes just days after Yoon defied previous arrest attempts at his residence. NTD's Sam Wong has the latest.
South Korean authorities on Tuesday extended an arrest warrant for impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol over his declaration of martial law last month. The warrant expired on Monday but was later reissued by the country's Corruption Investigation Office. Officials want Yoon to be held for questioning over allegations of plotting an insurrection, a crime punishable by life in prison or the death penalty. Since Parliament voted to suspend its power last month, Yoon has been hunkering down with his family at his gated compound in Seoul. Investigators and police sought to detain Yoon at his home but gave up after a 5-hour standoff with his guards on Friday.
Our nation is facing a critical moment.
Yoon's actions to resist arrest triggered a large rally outside his home. His critics called for an immediate arrest, while supporters pledged to shield the president from prosecutors.
This is fundamentally a conflict between the Free Bloc and the Socialist Bloc. The United States stands at the very top of the Free Bloc, and South Korea is the country that has benefited the most from that top nation.
마지막 순간까지 국가를 위해 최선을 다하겠습니다.
Yoon is South Korea's first incumbent president to face arrest for his attempt to declare martial law. He cited threats from communist North Korea and urged the elimination of what he called anti-state forces in the opposition party, which controls the parliament. The move prompted responses worldwide. Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited Seoul on Monday, reaffirming his confidence in the country's democratic processes.
Korea's democracy has been tested in recent weeks, just as American democracy has faced challenges throughout our history. But you are responding by demonstrating your democratic resilience.
Neighboring North Korea and Communist China, Seoul is considered one of Washington's most important allies in Asia and the Indo-Pacific. But challenges persist as North Korea test fired what is said was a new hypersonic missile on Monday. South Korea's acting president condemned the launch as a serious threat to security, both on the Korean peninsula and worldwide. Sam Wong, NTD News, Washington, D.C.
Over to Britain, where an investigator is urging action to tackle child grooming gangs and dismisses calls for further inquiries. This comes amid an ongoing and heated debate over the issue between Elon Musk and Britain's Prime Minister. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has more from London.
Alexis J., the lady behind Britain's independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, has called for urgent action rather than further inquiries into Britain's grooming gang scandal. This as political tensions over the scandal continue to grow. The grooming gang scandal revealed how gangs of mostly Pakistani men had groomed, trafficked and raped young white girls across numerous towns in Britain over decades. It returned to the political agenda following an ongoing row between Elon Musk and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Jay was the head of a 7-year inquiry published in October 2022 after reviewing evidence from 7,000 individuals.
Locally, people need to step up to the mark and do the sorts of things that have been recommended. I think there's something like 400 recommendations that we identified through a national charity in all the reviews that had already been carried out, and many of those were simply not met.
The row between Musk and Starmer has seen Musk claim Starmer failed to tackle the scandal when he was the UK's lead prosecutor. Starmer has defended his record, saying he tackled the gangs head-on. Though Jay said the row distracts from the issues, she also said she is pleased that the scandal and her recommendations were getting attention, and acknowledged the row may have given the government a push to act. Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick told the BBC that a lot has been learned from past reviews into grooming gangs and child abuse, but added recent revelations show a much bigger scale.
The Jay review, for example, looked at 6 towns. We now suspect that at least 50 towns have had grooming gangs of this kind. And so it's right that we have a full national inquiry.
He said a national inquiry would ensure victims have justice, it would help prevent other vulnerable girls from going through the same abuse, and it would hold officials who allegedly covered up the abuse to account. On Monday, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper said it's time for action, not more inquiries, and said the government will implement recommendations from past reviews.
First, I can confirm we will make it mandatory to report abuse. Second, we'll also legislate to make grooming an aggravating factor in the sentencing of child sexual offences. And third, we will overhaul the information and evidence that is gathered on child sexual abuse and exploitation and embed it in a clear new performance framework for policing.
She also committed to setting out more details about other recommendations in the future as well. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
Coming up, U.S. Steel and Nippon Steel sue the Biden administration for blocking their deal. A security policy analyst joins us to explore the potential national security risks of the deal when we return. Welcome back. If you're just joining us now, here's some today's top headlines. President-elect Trump announced that a billionaire from Dubai is investing $20 billion in the U.S. to build new data centers across multiple states. Trump also said he would not rule out the use of military force to seize control of the Panama Canal and Greenland. U.S. District Judge Eileen Cannon blocked the public release of Special Counsel Jack Smith's final report on his investigations into Trump. Meanwhile, a New York appeals court judge rejected Trump's attempt to call off his sentencing in the New York criminal case. Former President Jimmy Carter's remains were transported from Atlanta, Georgia to Washington, D.C. for funeral services. His casket now lies in state at the Capitol, where members of Congress have begun paying their respects. Firefighters in Los Angeles scrambled to corral a fast-moving wildfire as a potentially life-threatening, destructive windstorm hit Southern California. Forecasters warn the worst may be yet to come, with the windstorm predicted to last for days. U.S. Steel and Nippon Steel are both suing the Biden administration for blocking their merger. Trump has also said he is against the deal. Now, why are both sides against the deal, and what are the national security implications of the potential deal? Joining us now to discuss is Grant Newsham, Senior Fellow at the Center for Security Policy and the Japan Forum for Strategic Studies. Grant, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you again. Now, you have Nippon and U.S. Steel suing the Biden administration for blocking this deal. Trump said he's against it. That's despite the U.S. having multiple other steel makers that produce more than U.S. Steel, like Nucor and Cleveland-Cliffs. How much risk to our national security would arise if this merger were to take place?
Well, in this particular case, not very much. If the president says that there is a national security risk, well, then he ought to lay it out clearly, explain what it is, and he ought to go explain it to the steel workers who want the deal to go through. In terms of the actual national security risk, the way the argument was made, if you followed this, was first it said, well, Nippon Steel has ties to China, and thus it should be disqualified. Well, it turned out that the ties were not very great, and they actually divested the main tie, the connection that they had to the People's Republic of China, to a Chinese company. I'd probably note that most of the companies on the New York Stock Exchange, the big ones, probably have far more ties to China and more dangerous ties to China than Nippon Steel does. So then the argument became, well, it's a foreign country, a foreign company that would have control of a steel company. In the United States, steel is an important industry. We can't have foreigners in charge of these kind of companies. And once again, it's an odd argument to make in this case. I could understand it if the idea was Nippon Steel was to buy the entire U.S. steel industry, but it's really one company they're after. And it's a troubled company whose future is very questionable if they don't get the Japanese money, the Japanese technology. And this is not really much of a case to be made in terms of national security, unless somebody's got some information that nobody knows about. So as I noted, the China connection isn't really much of an issue. And you'll notice also the United States is glad to have Chinese companies and Chinese groups doing all sorts of things here. So it doesn't look good. In this case, from a national security perspective, that argument is not a very good one, as I see it. If the best you can do is say, well, foreigners shouldn't own a steel company, well, that's not the best argument, and particularly when the foreigners in question are the Japanese, who we claim are our most important ally in the entire world. And they are, in fact, darn important if we expect to fend off China in Asia and globally.
Speaking of Japan being a U.S. ally, this isn't the first time a Japanese company has invested in an American firm. You mentioned in one of your recent pieces that Mitsubishi writing a $9 billion check to save Morgan Stanley. Mitsubishi is now their largest shareholder. However, that wasn't a takeover. What would you say Japan hopes to gain out of this deal with U.S. Steel?
Well, they want to improve their own business prospects. That's what Nippon Steel is in business to do. And it is a good investment from that perspective. But you always have to go back and look at the importance Japan places on the United States. The Japanese government and most Japanese know that their defense depends on the United States. They need a U.S. that has a sort of solid industry to include a steel industry and a strong military. So this, as I said, Japan is not just any country. And the Japanese have huge dependence on the United States for their protection. So there's a business reason for doing this. And at the same time, there's a very good sort of defense reason, security reason for the Japanese and Nippon Steel to live up to the promises it has made, and has made some very solid promises about treating U.S. steel like a treasured asset and protecting the production, protecting the workers there. And they've even made written commitments. They have also said that they will give in some respects, the U.S. government a veto over some of the business decisions they make. That is unprecedented. Now, they do have to live up to that if the deal is somehow reversed by President Trump. And they have to do more than just follow the written promises. They have to live up to the full spirit of this.
Now, aside from those national security concerns, another concern you mentioned that critics are bringing up is Nippon Steel's business deals in China. Now, if this merger deal does go through, what would that mean in terms of global competition with China?
Well, it would make Nippon Steel and the U.S. Steel combination apparently the second largest steel producer in the world. And this is very much part of the fight we're having with China, and China's having with us. It's economic as much as military. And China could produce all the steel for everyone in the world if they wanted to, and they'd be glad to do it and put everyone else out of business. And if the free world is going to defend itself, it has to defend itself economically as well. And when you have two major countries linking up via their steel companies, steel industries, that presents a nice option for, say, the free nations that play by the rules. And it is a good challenge to what the Chinese are trying to do with us.
Now, from the perspective of those in favor of the deal, this merger would invest in American industry. All the top shareholders of U.S. Steel are American companies. They would benefit, and Nippon Steel itself doesn't represent Japan. It's a publicly traded company, meaning Americans could also become shareholders if they wanted to. Given all of that, do you think politics has played a part in this debate around stopping this merger?
I think it's immensely political, and people seem to think that, and I think they're probably right, that it is an effort to placate the leadership of the USW, the United Steelworkers Union. It seems that most of the employees, most of the rank and file in this union actually want the deal to go through. And U.S. Steel employees, union members, want the deal to go through as well. But this is something that a lot of politicians have trouble sort of weaning themselves off of, is union bosses versus the rank and file of a union. And it's almost a rote response. If the union bosses say something, well, you got to do what they say instead of listening to the people who actually work there. And as you mentioned earlier, Mr. Trump, when he was running for office, he came out against the deal as well, as did Vice Presidential candidate J.D. Vance. It remains to be seen what they do now. It is, as I wrote, it would be nice to see them, both President Biden or President Trump, once he's president, and J.D. Vance, go make their case in the union halls in Southwest Pennsylvania and in Indiana, and to the Chamber of Commerces in these areas that are going to be hammered hard if this deal is not approved.
Zooming out a bit, given that Japan is an important strategic ally of the U.S., we just saw Secretary of State Antony Blinken there stressing Japan's role in maintaining peace in the Indo-Pacific. What does the debate around Nippon and U.S. Steel mean for U.S.-Japan relations going forward?
Well, it's not going to kill the relationship. That's always going to be there for the foreseeable future, but it doesn't help. Now, the Japanese do notice when ultimately you have the American political class, parts of it saying, we don't want a Japanese company to buy a U.S. company because, well, you're Japanese. That's how they will interpret it. And that's never a good thing, because we are going to be asking the Japanese to do more defense-wise than they have ever done before very long. And it's going to be things they don't want to do, but we're going to need them to do it. This is an unnecessary distraction when you pick a fight over this particular transaction, to my way of thinking. But I say it won't kill the relationship, but it doesn't help it very much at all. And it's always going to be there. And it's funny how sometimes these minor resentments, over time, they blow up into something far more serious. And one thing I do want to point out in all of this is that if an American company, for example, wanted to buy an iconic, or what once was an iconic Japanese company, the Japanese might not respond to it very well. So there's a sort of criticism that can go both ways. But looking at the equities of this particular transaction, I think it is one that needs to go through. There really is no national security risk. The Japanese see it, they can see it as well as anyone. And they will take it the wrong way. And it's not something that should be distracting us when we've got far bigger problems coming our way. And as I said, Ask the steel workers at US Steel what they want. Somebody should listen to them. And too often they don't get listened to. And it would be good if both President Biden in his next 12 days or however long it is, and President-elect Trump, they actually listen to the workers as well, and the people who live in these places.
Grant Newsham, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
The Pentagon says China is building up its Navy and nuclear capabilities. What does this mean for U.S. security, and could corruption inside China's military slow the CCP's plans? Tune in to NTD's Capital Report at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to hear what a former British diplomat, now consultant on international security, has to say about China's operations. Coming up in NFL news, will All-Pro wideout Tyreek Hill be traded following his comments Sunday? Dave Martin joins us to discuss after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Martin now for your sports news. We're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on right now, but let's start in the NFL as All-Pro wide receiver Tyreek Hill had some choice words to say about staying in Miami Sunday following their loss. Has he asked for a trade?
No, that's according to Dolphins general manager Chris Greer, who met this week with Hill. Now, here's what Hill said Sunday after the Dolphins were eliminated from the playoffs. Quote, "This is the first time I haven't been in the playoffs. For me, I have to do what's best for my family. If that's here or wherever the case may be, I'm going to open that door for myself." Now, it should be noted that the Dolphins general manager said that Hill didn't exactly walk those comments back either, though, in their meeting. In any case, not only did Miami miss out on the playoffs, Hill had his lowest yardage and catches in a season in like 5 years, and that was like 2019. That was the year he missed like a quarter of the year with injuries too. Now last year, unbelievable season, like 1,800 receiving yards, led the league in receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. This year, I think not having Tua Tagovailoa for 6 of their games really hurt him and the team. They had Miami lost 4 of those 6 games, and they narrowly missed out on the playoffs. I think they can kind of trace it back to not having their star quarterback really for that.
Well, moving to college basketball tonight, a number of ranked teams are in action, including number 1 ranked Tennessee, which plays at number 8 Florida.
Yeah, big time matchup in the SEC. Tennessee is the only undefeated team left. They're 14-0. They have wins over Baylor, Arkansas, Syracuse, and some others. Florida was undefeated until Saturday when they lost at 6th ranked Kentucky. By the way, the SEC very loaded in basketball this year as well too. 6 of the top 10 ranked teams are from that conference, including 2nd ranked Auburn, which plays tonight as well at Texas. Now elsewhere going on tonight, you've got 4th ranked Duke hosting Pittsburgh, 3rd ranked Iowa State hosts Utah, and number 24 Michigan plays at 22nd ranked UCLA. Now the Wolverines back in the top 25 this year after that rough season last year. I think they went 8-24, ended up firing their head coach. So a lot of college basketball is on tonight.
Well, speaking of what's on tonight, we have the debut of a new golf league called TGL, which will feature a number of major golf stars and a made-for-TV event. How will this be different from the PGA?
Really different in so many ways. Just to cater really to a TV audience, it's going to be played indoors for one thing. It's going to combine simulated golf with real golf. Basically, players are going to hit into this huge simulated screen. It's like 50 by 60 feet. It's going to project where the ball goes, but then when you get within 50 feet of the hole, no more simulation. The hole's going to be right there in this indoor dome arena. This is in Palm Beach, Florida, by the way. So you're going to play it right there. Also similar to Live Golf, this is going to be team golf. 6 teams of 4 players each, representing like different cities around the U.S. They'll combine 9 holes of alternate shots, 6 holes of singles. Plus, to speed up the pace, they'll have a 40-second shot clock, essentially. Mics are going to be on the players, I believe, at all times. You hear them, talking or whatever. Also, now as far as the names are concerned, Tiger Woods is not only on one of the teams, he's actually also a co-founder. So is Rory McIlroy. There's some major sports owners here. You got Steve Cohen, who owns the Mets, the billionaire there. John Henry, who owns the Red Sox. Even Steph Curry's got a minor stake in it. But obviously, this is quite a different take on golf. No one really knows, how this is going to play, how it's going to play out. I talked to Epoch Times golf contributor James Ward. He's covered over 100 championships in his career, so he's really seen it all. I wanted to play actually what he said. Here's his take on how he thinks this is going to go.
Golf is trying to connect with a new generation of potential players. And the traditional mechanism of watching golf on television through traditional golf courses is really not generating the viewers that really will have an impact on possibly growing the game. So this is really a mechanism to see if they can marry technology with a different streamlined version of golf. I don't know if somebody really gets interested in seeing some newfangled team concept where we say it's the New York team versus the Orlando team, and we have Ricky Fowler playing up against Shane Lowry. I don't know if that, raises any level of concern or emphasis on this,
Yeah, it's a big risk. I agree with him, but I think there's a lot of intrigue and excitement about how this is going to possibly play out tonight. Of course, everyone wants to see Tiger Woods. Now, his team, he's part of the Jupiter team. They will play next week. But anyway, tonight's golf games start at 9 o'clock Eastern Time on ESPN.
All right, a lot of developments, Dave, as always. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.